talking about the Noahic Covenant. So there we are, back to our icky covenants again. So Noahic Covenant, and little review. So last week we talked about the context of the covenant, just everything leading up to it. We talked about the seed of the serpent, the seed of the woman. We talked about just the world being broken. So the covenant of works is broken. Now sin and death have entered the world. And we're seeing the effects of that right off the bat with the murder of Abel by Cain. We have Cain's descendants. They're starting kind of their own society, just wickedness and evil. But then you have the sons of Seth. They seem to be godlier, following the Lord. But even they are corrupted. We see in Genesis 6, I gave you my interpretation of it, which is that the sons of God are referring to the sons of Seth. And even they are kind of intermingling with the line of Cain, and now the whole world is evil. It's full of violence. I want to remind you of, we talked about the two kingdoms. Anybody remember what kingdoms they are? Kingdom number one, we call it the common kingdom, or you could say the kingdom of creation is also how it's spoken of. And then we have the redemptive kingdom. Which kingdom are we a part of as Christians?
Well, we're in one and we belong to the other.
Hey, there you go. Sandy wasn't up for my tricks. That's good. Yeah, we're in both, technically. So we truly belong to this one, don't we? We're citizens of heaven. But we're still citizens of this kingdom. Last time I checked, I still vote. Going to vote this week, right? So we are members of both kingdoms, truly. But only believers are members of the redemptive kingdom. So we have a higher king. But what did Jesus say? You render to Caesar nothing because you belong to King Jesus, right? That's what he said. In the original Greek, that's what it says. No. He says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. He's acknowledging they still belong to the Roman Empire. We belong to the American Empire, American, whatever it is. Anyway, so we belong to both kingdoms. And that's a good point. So what the Noahic Covenant is talking about, what it's addressing is not the redemptive kingdom. It's addressing the common kingdom, or the kingdom of creation. The covenant of works and the covenant with Noah both cover the same group of people. So the covenant of works covers every single person in existence. Same thing with the Noahic covenant. When we get to the new covenant, it does not cover every single person in existence. It's only those who belong to Christ. So this one is going to establish the common kingdom, set it up, give it some rules. All right, so let's go to Genesis 9. We're going to look at the details of the covenant. I'm going to try to do this whole thing. We'll see how we do. But so Genesis chapter 8, 8 and 9 is where we're going to look. So what's really interesting, I don't know if you've noticed this just in your own reading, but when you get to Noah, there's so many elements that remind you of the creation narrative. So many things that remind you of Adam. And it's not a coincidence. It's definitely on purpose. So you can see this in your notes. Both Genesis 1:2 and Genesis 8:1 speak of the Spirit. The Hebrew word ruach, which means wind or spirit, can be translated either way. And the ruach is among the waters. So remember that Genesis 1:2, the Spirit was hovering above the waters. And now that the floodwaters are receding, we're seeing that the same thing is happening here. The ruach, or the Spirit, the wind, is among the waters. And then we have dry land emerging from the waters. That's something we see in the creation narrative. It's happening now again with the flood. The flood is describing a new creation. The creation was kind of destroyed in a sense, and now a new creation is arising from it. That's how it's being described to us. You're meant to think back, only a few chapters previous to the creation narrative. You have birds, animals, and creeping things populating the heavens and the earth. So Genesis 8:17, bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh. So just a reminder, this is after the flood is done. So now God says, bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. That just sounds like Genesis 1, doesn't it? That they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Which brings us to the next thing, Genesis 9:1 and 2. Noah receives a commission from God that's very similar to that of Adam. So God, this is Genesis 9:1, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Have you heard that before? And fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth. Now we haven't heard that before. That's a little different. And upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea, into your hand they are delivered. So I'm gonna talk about the difference there, but just overall, the feel of it is much the same. It just feels like you're being transported back to Genesis 1. Okay, so all that to say, that's reminding us of the creation narrative, but it isn't actually new creation. We're waiting for the new creation, the new heavens and the new earth. This is not actually that. So it's kind of evoking that kind of picture in your head, but it's not an actual resetting of the system, and that's a quote from somebody. This isn't the world restarting. And the reason we know that is, for one thing, the world hasn't fundamentally changed. We're not going back to the garden. It's not like the flood happens and now the world's a paradise. Sin is definitely still around, and that's the key point. So compare these verses. You can see them in your notes. So Genesis 8:21, this is after the flood. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, that's a sacrifice that Noah made, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man. Here's why. For the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. This is after the flood. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. Okay, so that's what he says after the flood, but that's also what he said before the flood. Genesis 6:5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It says the same thing. So the flood did not change anybody's heart. It didn't change the world. It didn't remove sin. Here's what I'm saying. It's not doing anything for the redemptive kingdom. It's only affecting the common kingdom. Just like in our world, you can make a law, but the law doesn't, a government making a law doesn't have the power to change anybody's heart, right? It doesn't have that power. Only the gospel has that power. So, point number 6. The flood did not save the souls of Noah and his family. It only saved their lives. That's a good thing, but it's not an ultimate thing. So, this is where we're going with this, is that the Noahic Covenant doesn't bring redemption to the world. We're waiting for another covenant to do that. But what it is going to do is it's going to give the world some order and some structure so that the wickedness and the violence that we were seeing is held back, it's restrained, and mankind is preserved. It's basically, in a nutshell, it's giving us government. Okay, so I want to go back to Genesis 9:1 and 2, and I want to point out just some of those differences. I'm just going to read you a really helpful quote. So I said Adam and Noah both received a very similar commission from God, be fruitful and multiply. That's what they had in common, but there's a difference. And so here's what Sam Rinahan says. He says, in Genesis 1, God told Adam and Eve to be fruitful, to multiply, to fill the earth, to subdue it, and to rule over it. But whereas that commission had a largely positive significance, an idea of building and mastery and usefulness and synergy, this commission, that's Noah's commission, brings with it the idea that man will achieve mastery over the animal kingdoms by fear and force, not wisdom and excellence. The same kind of language occurs when Israel is going to enter Canaan. God says that he will put the fear and dread of the Israelites upon the Canaanite nations. So also Noah and mankind are called to build and cultivate and expand and construct and establish human civilization. They are to take advantage, in the best sense of the phrase, of the natural world around them. So this isn't the beautiful kind of thing that Adam was supposed to do. Adam wasn't going to get a sword and, hack down the weeds. There were no weeds, right? in what his original task was going to be, he wasn't going to have to use any sort of violence in his subduing. Subdue to us has kind of maybe a violent overtone. It kind of sounds like you're going to start hitting people. I subdue my children. No, I'm kidding. Subdue just has more of a forceful feel to it. But that's not what was going to happen with Adam. It was going to be certainly just gentler. There wasn't going to be that kind of resistance. Whereas with Noah, he's in a different world. He's in a world filled with sin. So when he's going to be fruitful and multiply and cultivate and build, it's going to be in the context of, well, resistance. And animals are, not going to be as friendly anymore. All right. So for Adam, it's called the creation mandate. And this is going to be called the cultural mandate. This is just, if you're reading a book about it, that's probably the term that they're going to use. And I said a little bit ago, just like the covenant of works, the Noahic covenant covers and applies to all people, which means it still applies to us. And so this cultural mandate that we just read in Genesis 9, it still applies to us. It's still relevant to us. It's not just an Old Testament thing. So it applies to everyone because we are all citizens of the common kingdom. It's universal in scope. Noah is our federal head. That's the language that we would use. Just as Adam was, Noah is as well. But the cultural mandate's different from the creation mandate. So we talked about Adam's task. It's a little bit different. He's going to be filling the earth with godly seed. Cultural progress for them would have meant the world becomes a temple. It's a holy place. But that's not how it's going to work this time. Because of the covenant of works and sin is in the world, it's not going to work for us. So we need a different kind of covenant to manage this fallen world that we live in. So we're going to get through the Noahic covenant, we're going to get a society that is ordered, a society, generally speaking, that restrains evil, but it's not going to be the redemptive kingdom. It's not going to be a holy place. It's not going to be a temple. We would like that, but it's not going to be the case. In other words, the Noahic covenant will not bring about a true new creation, but it does serve to preserve humanity and preserve the promised seed of the woman. So remember that in Genesis 3:15, this whole promise of salvation rests upon the birth of this child, a descendant of the woman. Now, they didn't know how long it was going to take for that to happen, but if the world is so full of violence, everybody's killing each other, at a certain point, there's not going to be anybody left to give birth to that Savior. So something needs to happen to give order to the world. I think we kind of take it for granted because we already have the Noahic covenant in place. But before that, the world was full of violence. There is a difference between our world today and the world before the flood. It was a much more violent place. There was less order, less restraining of evil. And so what all that means is that this covenant doesn't save anybody, but it does serve the covenant that does save people. This covenant preserves a world so that there will be a world to save. This is how I put it. It preserves the world from unrestrained violence until God brings the serpent crusher into the world. So that's the goal of it. All right. So those are all just helpful details, hopefully helpful, before we actually get into what the covenant is doing. What are the terms? So just pausing there. Questions, thoughts on all of that? All right. So the terms of the covenant. Now this is just a really important point. Because the Noahic covenant is universal, it applies to everybody, that means its terms are still in effect. So when we read the stuff that's being promised in this covenant, both our obligations and God's obligations, these are still things that apply to us, to everybody. They haven't expired. This is universal. In the same way that people are still under the curse of the covenant of works because of sin and death, they're still in the world, that covenant's still in effect. In the same way, the Noahic covenant's still in effect as well. So what are the terms? Now, we talked about guaranteed commitments. So we have commitments. God has commitments. We're going to start with our commitments, our side of things. So this is Genesis 9:1 and 2, which we've read. Be fruitful and multiply is the first one. So this is still a command for humanity. That hasn't expired. Marriage, family are still normative. And just look at the world around us. Yes, there's reasons that you might be single. It's God, Jesus endorses that. He was single himself. But generally speaking, 95% of people, the vast majority, are going to get married and have a family. All things being equal. And family is still the foundation of our society. So that's a command. That's there. It's supposed to promote life and fill the world with people, image bearers. That's still going on. It's just in a context of sin. And then let's look at Genesis 9, 5 to 7. Here's another section giving some terms of the covenant. So verse 5, surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man. From the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. And as for you, be fruitful and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply in it. So everybody still needs to obey this command. God's setting up some rules here. Now it's important to say this isn't an individual. How do you interpret this? Is this an individual command? That if someone kills somebody that it's up to you to take vengeance upon that person? And it's Genesis 9, I'm just quoting the verse. I think we need to say no, not least of which because we have a verse that says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, leave it up to the Lord. But also because we have a negative example, don't we, with Lamech. There's two Lamechs. There's the good Lamech and the bad Lamech. Lamech, Noah's son, and there's the other Lamech. It's really kind of lame. Yuck. So Lamech is famous for his vengeance. He says, if Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. And clearly that's not something we should imitate. So this isn't talking about personal revenge, which is where we sort of get the idea that this is setting up rules for mankind as a whole, for society, for government. Before the flood, we were pretty much just ruled individually by families. Now we're going to actually have government. So why does God give us this command? He says to be fruitful and multiply, and the next thing he says, if anybody kills people, then there needs to be punishment for them. If you murder someone, then you're going to be put to death. It's very, very serious, very solemn. Where does that come from? What's the connection? Well, if the first command is to be fruitful and multiply, then obviously murder completely undoes that. This is what we saw leading up to the flood. This is God giving an antidote to the things that were going on prior to the flood. So this is Genesis 6, 11 to 13, and I underlined the relevant words for you. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh. Here's why. For the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. I think this is why the text makes a point of telling us that the sons of God, which I take to be the descendants of Seth, intermingled with the descendants of Cain. Because what did Cain do? What's he known for? Murder. Now, all of his descendants kind of copy that. They're just violent. You make me angry, I kill you. We saw that with Lamech, right? If vengeance was sevenfold, mine's 77-fold. They just are angry people that just will kill you if you look at them wrong. It's a violent place. It's the Wild West. There's no government at all. There's no restraining of their evil. This is what's happening. But now, even the good guys, so to speak, have mingled with them, and now the whole world represents Cain rather than representing Abel. And so now the Noahic Covenant, God comes and he gives some rules, and he's addressing this problem of unrestrained violence. And he does it by handing human societies the sword of Romans 13. If you want to turn to Romans 13 and just look at it in your own Bibles, go for it. I put the verses here in your handout, but feel free to look at that. So the relevant portion is Romans 13, 4 and 5. And this is God's job description for government. He's talking about the governing authority. For he, the governing authority, is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger. Notice that language. Avenger. To execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience's sake. Now, what's really important, I think, about Romans 13 is that it tells us essentially that government didn't just pop out of thin air. It wasn't just like some people got together and thought, hey, it'd be a cool idea to have a government. It was God's idea. It was started in the Noahic Covenant, and we see it explicitly laid out. Here's their job description, which God decides, by the way. God decides the government's job description. He gives it to us in Romans 13. And it's to punish the evildoer, to reward the one who does good. And in order to punish the evildoer, God gives them a sword. Now, it's really interesting. What does he mean by sword? I think you can probably piece it together, but just in case you weren't sure, Paul uses this word sword in the same book in Romans a little bit earlier in a passage that we love. So Romans 8:35 says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword?" What does he mean there in the context? What would a sword do to separate you from Christ? Well, if you're not sure, the next verse spells it out. As it is written, "For your sake we are killed all day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter." So it's in the context of persecution. They are experiencing the sword. Unfortunately, it's probably the sword of the government, right? Roman government persecuting Christians, using the sword that they should be using to punish evildoers. Instead, they're using the sword to punish the doers of good, punish Christians, kill them. And so Paul says, Romans 8:35, even the sword may separate you from the love of, separate you from your body, your soul from your body, but it can't separate you from Christ. That's his point. Even if you die, even if you're killed and slaughtered, even that won't separate you from Christ. All that to say, he's using the sword the same way he's using it in Romans 13, which is that this is what's called judicial retribution. God is establishing judicial retribution. Notice the language of avenger in Romans 13. And this is against what Lamech's idea is. Someone wrongs you in society. Don't go out and take personal, vengeance upon them. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord, and he's delegated some of that avenging responsibility and authority to the government. They can avenge the evildoer. They can get vengeance in that sense. So you leave it to the authorities. Wrongdoers are punished by an authority that's higher than that of the individual. So all that to say, the Noahic Covenant establishes government. It gives order to the common kingdom. And it does that so that evil can be punished, so that this violent world can be restrained. And you say, well, we still have lots of violence. Yes, but it's nothing like it was before the flood. You're like, if this is restrained, I don't want to see unrestrained. Exactly.
Well, doesn't it also say, not the Bible, but doesn't that also say that if you're the guy that's got the job to kill, you're not going to hell for it? God saying, okay.
Yeah, right. You have an authority to use the sword. Now, obviously, we see that abused, and so that's not acceptable. But there is a context in which to do it.
There's a book that was just published. I found it up in Washington when I was visiting Walker. It's called The Faithful Executioner, and it's about, in Luther's Germany, a diary somebody discovered of an executioner and his jobs and the way that they looked at and perceived their jobs as, it's very biblical,
yeah.
But they're supposed to, under the empire, carry out this. There was a social stigma to it, but they took it biblically. And
yeah.
they had that old holdover from the Roman world that the sword was an honorable way to die, better than hanging or better than some other methods. But anyway, I'll show it to you if I get a chance. It's just not often we get a perspective from somebody who that's their job.
Right.
Well, the model that we have for justice, she's blindfolded, but she has a sword and a scale.
Yeah. It's amazing when you read some of those older writers. Our founding fathers, honestly, were very well read on this subject of what the Bible teaches about government. You go back to a lot of the reformers; they wrote a lot about it, and so that sword is intentional. And I guarantee you, it's a reference to Romans 13. They know what they're talking about. They know the imagery. So anyway. What are the goals of the Noahic Covenant? We've seen them both. Is to preserve the family, the building block of society, and to preserve life. So, which means to stop murder, stop restrained violence. So, preserve life, preserve the family. All right, I think we'll flesh that out by looking at God's side of it. So, let's go to Genesis 8:22 and 9:8-17. Look at those verses. So what are God's commitments? Genesis 8:22. He says, "While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease." And then Genesis 9, beginning in verse 8. Then God spoke to Noah and his sons with him, saying, "And as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you, and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations." Right? This isn't just Noah's generation, right? "I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." And God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on." You get it? How many times is he going to say this? All flesh that's on the earth. This is for everybody, for perpetual generations. So you notice, there's a balance to this. So our end of the bargain is to preserve life, be fruitful and multiply. So expand life. He says, get married and have babies essentially, but fill the earth with image bearers. It's the same original goal. And then have a society and a government where people stay alive and you're not just killing each other all the time. It's not a perfect society that it was supposed to be, but it's going to restrain evil mostly so that people can come to know God and be saved by him. That's our end of the bargain. God's end of the bargain is, I'm going to make a promise not to kill you, not to bring judgment upon the earth. So both ends of it are preserving life, preserving this world. Now, make a little comment in the parentheses. This is letter D, point 3. So God's promising that he will preserve our lives, but it's not, of course, that's not an individual promise. He's not promising every single individual, you're never going to die. Of course, that's not the goal. But he's saying, as a whole, I'm never going to bring this global, cataclysmic flood to destroy the earth again. Covenants have sacraments. They're also called signs, visible sermons. Sometimes that's what Augustine called them. Our new covenant that we're in has sacraments. Can anybody name them? Baptism is one. Communion, that's right. So those are our visible signs. A sign that the covenant's true. And the Noahic covenant has a sacrament or a sign as well. And it's the rainbow. Now, I just think this is really, if you've ever thought about why the shape of the rainbow, in the text itself, God just calls it a bow. So that's obviously a weapon, right? that you shoot. Which direction is the bow facing? Yeah, is it toward us, toward Earth? No, it's away. Actually, it's toward him. I wonder if that's pointing to something, that God would somehow bring judgment upon himself rather than us. I don't know. That doesn't lead me anywhere. Anyway, but you get the idea, though. He's not pointing his arrows at us. He's pointing them away from us. So that's the sign in and of itself. You can look at this beautiful rainbow, and you are seeing a picture of God saying, I'm not going to point my arrows of judgment at you. They're going to be pointed elsewhere. It's wonderful.
It could be pointing toward Jesus and what he did for us.
Do you think that's possible? I don't even, really?
Well, just symbolic.
Absolutely not. I'm being silly. Absolutely.
In Revelation,
That's definitely what I think.
There's a rainbow around the throne.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, I love it. There might be a connection there. Yeah. All right. So the rainbow is awesome. I think it definitely points us to Christ. A better covenant. All right. So this is an unbreakable covenantal promise from God that he will not bring judgment upon the earth. Now, of course, we know he is going to bring a final day of judgment. And so obviously it can't mean that I'm never going to bring any kind of judgment ever again, but I'm going to preserve the world for some kind of purpose. And so again, this is where we say, of course, it points to Christ, because the purpose of it, well, let me just keep going. He's preserving the earth for some reason. All right, so Matthew 5:44 and 45, I think this is probably the basis for why Jesus can say this. So he says, love your enemies. Basically, here's what God's doing in the Noahic Covenant. He's loving his enemies. That's what he's doing. Because rather than destroying them, he's loving them and preserving their lives. And so Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Why? So that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. So you can be like him, because that's what he does. He loves his enemies. How does he love his enemies? For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. You want the sun to rise and give sunlight to your crops? You need water to water your crops? You know, the farmers in these days pray for rain, not like our farmers today where if rain comes, it's a curse. We need sunshine, we need rain. And God doesn't withhold it from you just because you're evil. That's kind of a Noahic covenant promise, right? We read that in Genesis 8:22. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, day and night, they won't cease. I'm going to keep this machine running. I'm not going to stop it just because you're violent and evil. He's going to love his enemies and his servants. Which is a good point. This is totally a tangent. But if someone experiences in their life blessings and good things, that doesn't necessarily mean that God's smiling upon you. I think it's unhelpful when we always tie together blessings and God's favor. Because we see people in this world who hate God and want nothing to do with him have prosperity, have good things happen to them. They have good lives, more or less. And that can happen. And so we shouldn't say, well, God's blessing them, he must really approve of what they're doing. Not necessarily. And the Noahic Covenant kind of tells us that God gives the sun rises on the evil and on the good. He gives rain to the just and on the unjust. He's just kind. He is
Doesn't
gracious.
he also say he does? Oh, what was I thinking? This is their time because they're going to be judged after they're dead.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Right. Yeah. So this is a time where they're going to. That's what he said to the Pharisees. You've gotten your reward now, but after this time is done, then yeah.
There's a couple of things in the parable of Lazarus too. The first one being that
Yes,
the
that's
rich
good.
man received many good things in his life.
That's right.
Lazarus many evil things.
Yes.
But also, they have the law and the prophets. They won't believe even somebody comes back from the dead. So there's that presence of God's written word that now is widespread, and that's a form of God's like rain.
Right.
Or sunshine too, and yet not everybody's going to be transformed by it.
That's a great reference. That's a great passage to mention. Perfect example, really, because you have the rich man who wouldn't be envious. I want to be like him. And then where does he end up versus Lazarus, the poor guy? And Now
And
he's...
why would he call him Lazarus? When has he just risen Lazarus from the dead? Or Lazarus
In the
from
context
dead?
of it, I don't think so.
I don't remember. Anyway.
Yeah. So,
And then you have the Psalm of Asaph.
Yeah, that's right.
Psalm 73.
yes.
Or is it, I always get 74, 73.
No, you're right.
It's 73.
Yeah.
When he says, when he's basically confessing that he was coveting how good they have it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, and then I went into the presence of the Lord and I understood their end.
Yes.
Surely you set them in high places and slippery places.
Slippery places, that's right. Yeah, that's a great reference too. So all that to say, we see the prosperity of the wicked, and that doesn't necessarily mean that God approves of them. It just means he's being kind to his enemies. That's the idea. That's what the Noahic Covenant is. It's God being kind to his enemies, not bringing judgment upon them. All right, we can just read this together so you can, this is, we're getting to the point of it. So this is letter D, point 4, lowercase b. Okay, from the context of Genesis, specifically Genesis 3:15, and just the context of the whole Bible, the purpose of this covenant is to preserve the world so that there will be a world to save. If we all kill each other, there won't be anyone alive to give birth to a Savior, and then nobody for that Savior to save. From another standpoint, without this promise from God, think about this, how many times would we have seen God, he sees the evil in the world and he just comes in judgment? How many floods would there have been, theoretically, without this promise? Think of God just being endlessly patient with us in our sin. So, if you're alive today, you are alive because of the Noahic Covenant. God did not kill your ancestors. He didn't come in judgment because he was keeping his promise to love his enemies so that one day you would have this chance to come to Christ and believe in him. I think it's wonderful if you can come from a family where you've got generations of believers. That's just wonderful. But sometimes you hear from people who, like, the last 10 generations were all wild axe-swinging pagans, and I was saved. And it's like, that's wonderful. They were all sinners. God mercifully preserved their lives, each one of them, so that you'd be born and you would know Christ. That's wonderful. And that's this covenant. That's what it does. It's preserving people alive so that people can hear about Christ and come to him. And so that means there are billions of people kept alive by God so that they can hear the gospel message and possibly turn to Christ to be saved from the greater wrath to come. And of course, that's what the flood's pointing to, which is that greater final day of judgment that doesn't just deal with people's bodies, but deals with their bodies and their souls. So the common kingdom serves the redemptive kingdom. It gives order to the common kingdom so that people will enter into the redemptive kingdom. Citizens of this one, but we really want to be citizens of this one. But we can't be citizens of this one if we're all dead because this kingdom destroyed itself. That's what the covenant, that's what it does. Okay. I think that's the first time I've ever actually gotten through all the notes that I